Hello, everyone joining us today for our 6th Disruptive Fridays weekly conversation. I'm Nada from the Disruption Network Lab team, and today's conversation has been prepared together with my dear Pedro Marum. When we were preparing this conversation, we were very much aware that the topic of harm reduction and self-organized care among queer and feminist collectives and communities is not an exclusive topic for the current situation. Despite that, during this isolation, we're facing a new vector of discomfort and the loss of physical connection, with lots of anxieties accompanied with a wave of temporary uncertainty and open-endedness. So today, in addition to hearing from all the amazing projects, collective and initiatives joining us in this conversation, we will also discuss how they come together and plan and continue their work. So I'm not going to speak too much, but before I pass to the others here, I want to remind everyone following our live stream that there's a live chat on our website page of Disruptive Fridays, where you can ask questions, drop us suggestions, thoughts, concerns, or engage in the discussion on the chat. My colleague Elena will be collecting the question you write on the chat and read them live to us. And I would like also to thank Elena for putting together all the production behind the series. And for the questions, just try to keep it short for us to be able to respond and just to break the barrier that we're not in the same room together in this occasion. And if you want to direct a question to a specific person in the conversation, feel free to do on the chat. And finally, if you wish to ask a question, it will be great not to ask it too much toward the end of our conversation, so Elena has the time to collect and read them. So in 45 minutes or so would be wonderful to ask. And now I give the word to Mariana, Pedro, Rafi, and Mariana to introduce themselves and their collective, with the hope that for this conversation, the internet and technology won't let us down. So now I give it to Mariana to start. And, yeah.
Hi, I'm Mariana Cunha, and I'm representing Kosmicare.
My name is Pedro. I'm part of the collectives Suspension and Mina. Mina is a party that has been happening in Lisbon for a while, and Suspension is a label that was born out of a collaboration between me and Blade. And not only we've been releasing music, but also organizing collective meetings in which we talk about club culture and also harm reduction together with Kosmicare.
Hello, I'm Rafi. I organize TS Raver, which is a peer-led harm reduction continuum of care in nightlife in Berlin. And we were created at Hole Festival in 2019 during the summer. And slowly we've evolved to a very complex system of radicalized people providing care in nightlife.
Hi, I'm Mariana Nobre V, and I'm part of Rabbit Hole, which is a party and artistic collective based in Lisbon, as well as Lecken, a femme-forward erogenous party located in Berlin. And I'm also now developing a collective project in the name of Emotional CPR, which aims to provide peer-to-peer support in the context of harm reduction and speaking about feelings, emotions, and bring that to the forefront of support.
Okay, thank you very much. And now that we have had a brief introduction of who is in the online room with us, we will speak also during this conversation on an upcoming project called Wavelength, that is born from a previous collaboration with Suspension that Pedro has spoke about, and Kosmicare from Rafi's organization. And will be the project will be organizing panels and rounds of discussion that they have already did in Portugal, and at the moment they ally with various collective that some of them are here today in our conversation to create an online platform focused on workshops and program. And Pedro will tell us a little bit more about Wavelength before we go into a longer presentation from each collective's work within the project. So Pedro, give the word to you.
Thank you, Nada. Wavelength was actually a project that was only conceived already during the lockdown amidst conversations, because not only many people from the queer party scene have been experiencing a lot of anxiety and also crisis of mental health, but also we have experienced some losses of lives and due to substance abuse. So we also realized that parties, despite not happening, these communities still stand for the same values as before, and these values should be operating not only during the parties, but also during isolation, during lockdown, during social distancing. So we thought it would be important to continue this work that we were already doing, that we would do at parties, but also in events. Mina, that has been happening for 3 years. I think around 2 years ago, we got in touch with Kosmicare, that is an NGO focused on harm reduction, and they do drug testing also. And we've been collaborating, and out of this collaboration, we realized that we should have other modes of intervention, not only in the party, and then with suspension, because we were happening in a gallery space that allowed to organize conversations, but also film screenings, workshops. We started a series of harm reduction focused events. In the last one was really successful. It was focused on a drug that has been affecting many people in our scene, GHB or GBL. But unfortunately, in the meantime, the parties have stopped. And then we decided to get into some other collectives and to start this project. And the idea of this project is to have not only workshops that operate online, but also to have a support channel that operates privately. We'll talk a bit more about this. Also to say that this is a project of mutual aid, but it's even though we're collaborating with the medical professionals and professionals of harm reduction, we do not handle emergencies. We're just kind of a structure of queer agents helping each other out and also sharing resources and knowledge and experience. And the very first event will be on the 21st of May, so in 2 weeks. You can send us an email through wavelength.19@gmail.com. So I'll pass to Mariana, that will talk a little bit about the work of Kosmicare and how they will intervene in Wavelength.
So Kosmicare is a non-governmental organization, and we work in harm reduction. We started in a festival in Portugal called Boom Festival. It's a festival mostly about psychedelic culture and sustainability. And because Portugal has a decriminalization law, meaning all drugs are decriminalized, and harm reduction programs are predicted in the law, it was possible to implement, almost 20 years ago, this action in this specific festival. And what we did is basically 3 main approaches. We have an info hub where people can come and talk to us and receive scientific-based and non-judgmental information on drugs. We also have a drug checking laboratory where people can come and test their drugs, and also a psychedelic crisis support hub where people can come if they are going through challenging experiences. And recently, in 2016, we formed an association, so we could take this work we were doing only in this specific festival every 2 years to outside this festival and to reach more people. So now, currently, we have a permanent drop-in in Lisbon. This is a place where we have weekly drug checking, so people can come and it's free, it's anonymous. They can test their drugs, meaning to know what they contain and in which quantity. And we also have a place where people can talk to integrate their challenging experiences with substances. We are also working on a library about drugs and psychedelic culture. And we were planning on making movie screenings and overall be just a place where people can come and talk to us or just do their own research. And we've also been working with festivals and parties, and we've been collaborating with Mina with Raver's Care Corner, where we are present at the raves and with harm reduction materials and a safe space to talk about substances. And as Pedro mentioned, also promoting these talks and workshops. And the last one was one on GHB, and actually this was the starting point for Wavelength, which we will keep talking about.
Thank you, Mariana. Maybe Pedro will speak a bit now. Pedro, we don't hear
Mariana?
You.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry. Mariana, before maybe I start talking, maybe you could talk a little bit about like the kind of work that that Kosmicare will be providing with Wavelength, and also about the study that has been running already since the pandemic has been going.
Yeah, basically our idea with Wavelength was to, well, since the pandemic changed a lot on the drug consumption's context and availability, we felt the need to address this. And Kosmicare has been making questionnaires along other teams like Energy Control and Progetto New Travel on mapping the differences this pandemic had on drug consumption in the south of Europe. And we see that there is a decrease in availability of substances, and also the motives of why people are taking them are different. And they are taking them more to deal with anxiety, to aid to sleep, to loneliness. So one of the things we will be doing is to set a support channel that people can reach us through and talk about their difficult experiences and what they're feeling. And Mariana Vieira maybe can talk a bit more about this particular part. And another issue of the quarantine and the pandemics is that all the parties and large events are forbidden for the next months. But with social measurements being lifted gradually, people will likely start making underground self-organized parties as a general. And I think this is interesting because this was already the context for a lot of queer parties. But one of the things we aim to do with Wavelength is to produce a guide on how these self-organized parties can provide a safer place for partygoers for simple things as having water available and all these basic safety measurements, but also how to implement harm reduction, like what materials they can make available and all these practices. And yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah, as Mariana from Kosmicare was saying, so the idea behind this collaboration has been like to kind of to create a bridge also between like this these experts in harm reduction. They have like the contact with psychiatrists, with people that have been working with substance abuse for many years, but often there's also kind of a disconnection between this knowledge and these people that are actually consuming the substances. And so the idea was to kind of like establish this bridge, because we have the contact not only with our community of people, but also there's a very big and established network of queer parties around Europe and even around the globe. And Mina and Suspension being part of, or somehow being very aware of this network, the idea is to kind of reach out to as many as possible, to make this knowledge as available as possible, and also in a moment that is maybe not as easy to be in touch with people, with peers that might help you out to go through difficult times. This is something that we would observe, that often queer parties that have a very let's say a very very open, are seen as very open spaces for experimentation, and also have a very pro-drug policy, let's say, at least many of the parties that we know. But we want to make people, or we want people to understand that this is not about enabling the consumption of these drugs, or even enabling certain self-destructive behaviors, but rather like exploring them and understanding them and providing peer-to-peer support. And this is why Raver's Care Corner, even though a lot of parties might not see or might not understand to which extent it is relevant to have like a stand where people can just like hang out and chill and just to read some leaflets and talk with people from harm reduction. But a lot of people, and maybe Rafi can even talk about it, see these spaces as really vital, because it's a space where they can rest, where they also sort of if they're going through some crisis. And at a whole festival that is like this music festival that gathers a lot of queer party collectives from around the world. Last year, the tent of TS Raver really proven to be an important space where this work was done almost like from a perspective of a community center. You would go there, you would have free water, you would have free information, people would look after you. You would be sure to find people that would have a phone to get in touch with someone in case of an emergency. There would be sober people that could like look after you. And overall, there was also space to just rest a bit in silence and with more comfort. So I think for us, it was always important like to ally these structures, because party making is a lot about like having fun and listening to music and to also test the limits. But I think we also have a lot of responsibility over our community. If we create these spaces, we need to look after each other. Also because, and this is something that we've seen during the pandemic, governments have also failed to offer the support that so many of us need. And queer, trans, POC communities, if many of us have been already overlooked or invisibilized by the infrastructures that should be providing us support. If we have the tools and the skills, it is also our responsibility to share them and to provide structures of mutual aid. And the idea of like having this operating even during isolation. Of course, many of us might already be a bit tired of all these DJ streams, and often they fail to also emulate the sense of communionship that a club could provide. But what we want to do is to have like these workshops, just like we were already having with suspension, but then to kind of couple them with like performances, with talks from various people, guests from the party scene. We can already like let you know that one of our guests will be, for example, Vanda from the feminist party Lecken. Will be talking with doctors about GHB, for example. So this is a way of like creating a bridge between the experts and people from the party scene. So it doesn't feel so much like a lecture from someone speaking from a higher ground. And then together with this, to also have other types of cultural programs like film screenings, DJ sets, only like party DJ sets, maybe also ambient DJ sets. Like, for example, Blue Drago, that has this program with transients that is focused on listening to ambient music as a way to provide peaceful energies to combat this anxiety produced not only by the capitalist forces, but also now accelerated during the lockdown and during the time of uncertainty. But there's also an issue that we've been noticing, is that oftentimes the people providing care are the people that are already burdened for being part of this community. Most of the people that provide care, and we see this in the kind of jobs that exist, all jobs related with care are mostly done by femme people, POC people, lower class people, queer people even, and there is a burden to it. So we also wanted to pay attention to this, and I guess Mariana Vieira will be able to talk a bit about this.
Yeah, so this is a very important topic for us at this moment. I have been part of awareness teams also in the nightlife party scene through Lecken, and one of the big things that was already coming up was how to provide support for people giving support, because a lot of times people that are in the awareness teams, they are providing care and assistance, which is something quite needed in these spaces, because they are also important spaces for us. They are not running right now, and this is a huge issue, because they also provide a space for feeling collective joy and being in a gathering, which is now what is so missed. But while the parties were running, there was already a need to provide support for supporters, and at the same time now in isolation, this is still something that has been brought up by the community, because a lot of people, on the one hand, might still be consuming substances, and regardless of that aspect, there are people that are going there already, queer people, precarious artists, who are in need of support, and this does not make it easier. So the people that do have the leverage and the ability to provide support to these people are also feeling overburdened. And a lot of times, because all of this is done in DIY context, especially considering that a lot of queer people are not necessarily going to go to mental health institutions or to go through the usual channels of support, this kind of care is a lot done in a community collective setting. So taking this into account, eCPR, Emotional CPR, is a project that I have gotten involved in. It is a collective project, Karoni and Caitlin Fisher. Caitlin is a eCPR trainer with lots of experiences on the field. The project was also partly started by her father, who is a psychiatrist. And Maria is a fellow artist and also working in the connection of art and healing. So we gathered actually in the beginning of the pandemic to try to look at emotional CPR, which is a practice that is based upon providing assistance in emotional moments of crisis or distress. And it originated in the field of mental health by people with lived experience in mental health situations. And usually this has been given in the form of a workshop to psychiatrists, social workers, so people that are directly working in the mental health field, as mainly a tool or a mode of the people working in this field to access the level and the realms of feelings and emotions when they are in dialogue with clients or people. However, our main point is to open up this practice and bring it also onto the level of the communities we are engaged in, queer communities and artist communities, in order to share these tools. So it's interesting to note that eCPR is not a mode of therapy per se, but is an open source frame for dealing very directly with emotions and feelings, which it's interesting to note that that is also something that we have become aware that is very connected to addiction, in the sense that addiction can also come from places of trauma, and the numbness or the effects that it has can lead a lot towards patterns of consumption. So there's a lot of connections in this field, and so eCPR is informed by practices of peer-to-peer support, and also crisis counseling, suicide prevention, and open dialogue. So it's interesting that we came together in the beginning of the pandemic to work on also introducing practices from somatics and contemporary dance into the practice of eCPR, so also considering the body in this field. And then we got locked up in a place where we kept on researching for 3 weeks, and developing this goal of opening this practice up to our peers. And this is where Wavelength came in. So the interesting point is that we were already wishing to bring this into the community, and through through Pedro and Mariana, thinking of Wavelength, the idea is that Wavelength also has a support channel, and that the support channel somehow provides a similar support that awareness teams were giving in parties, in the sense of being able to assist or to dialogue with people that are potentially going through either crisis or have questions or doubts and do not wish to go right away into let's say, medicalized care. So we are not substituting that, and this is something very important, that we are developing this as a way to support people and also to guide them and to forward them in case it is needed for other types of are all queer and foreign, are aware of the context that we are talking from. So the point of eCPR in connection to Wavelength is to provide support to supporters. Wavelength aims to have a pool of people that are volunteering to give support to other peers and queer folks that are experiencing difficulties in times of isolation, distancing, in connection to substance use or not. It's also possible that emotional crises come without that aspect, but we do have the frame is to talk about also substance consumption and have a pool of people that are informed on these aspects, have previous experience of the context and the culture. What eCPR will do or aims to do is to provide support to supporters. So in the sense, giving people who will provide support tools for them to also check in with themselves and be able to not get caught up in the crisis themselves. And this is something, yeah, as I said, that had been signaled as something needed already previous to the current situation, and now it becomes even more clear that this is valuable tool. So we aim to give workshops and to share the practice. It's an open source practice that we aim to, it doesn't promise, it's not aimed at fixing, curing, or solving, but mostly giving the tools for a connection to feelings and to emotions that a lot of times are also numbed out through trauma, through substance abuse. So addressing this directly. And I think I did not forget anything in this context, but Pedro, if I did, you can also signal me.
No, I think it's all good. I think we can then also talk a bit about better how the structure, or how are we envisioning to work. I mean, we applied for funding, so the idea, of course, that a lot of this work in parties can be paid, or a lot of the times it's volunteer based, but in parties, it's in Mina, for example, this was paid labor. Of course, it was not super well paid, but it was. There was always like something that could be given, because parties generate money. Now it's even harder, because not only we're isolated, but we're also like we're also impoverished due to this pandemic. Many of us have lost our jobs. Many of us were already incapable of investing money in this kind of projects. So this is a challenge that we're now facing, but we've been applying for funding, and the idea is to eventually pay everyone that can provide this work, operating not only in the channels of support, but also the people giving the workshops or participating in the production of the project. And yeah, the idea is to really connect with various projects. I mean, of course, now it's mostly a collaboration between projects divided between Lisbon and Berlin. But the idea is to expand to reach also other communities, other cities, other realities, and to hear and learn from all these other communities. And that's also why we reached out to Rafi and TS Raver, because of course their work is mostly focused on trans folks and also POC people, and they've been operating various parties here in Berlin, not only the more queer feminist parties, but also parties that are mostly populated by gay guys. You know, consumptions of GHB are completely insane oftentimes. So I guess like Hafi already carries a bit of that experience, not only working in the context of a festival, but also in various parties in Berlin. Yeah, Rafi.
Hello. Yes, so TS Raver is a complex structure that involves many different methods. We have a kind of a practical side that we apply to, which is psych first aid and understanding how to look for emergencies. And we also do not treat emergencies, but we work along people's transits and how creating a dialogue in these spaces can get people to sort of unpack how they're taking care of each other. And with queer and trans people and people of color, we often find that they're already at an increased risk of harm. And so when we're in parties and we're taking substances, there can be an even a higher risk that happens. And so giving people the space to experiment with different altered states, with people to anchor them in case something happens. And it's a critical care, it's an access point inside of a harm reduction continuum that is in collaboration with a dance floor and has everybody inside of a space moving forward together and not necessarily trying to fix one another, because we know that that's what mainstream psychotherapy tries to do, and that's why people don't seek out help, because it's makes them feel further stigmatized. So TS Raver has a lot of different people doing a lot of different things from different perspectives, all with a kind of a shared agreement that we're decolonizing our practice. And that is through caring for one another. It's through trans liberation, it's through queer liberation. It's a confrontation, as Pedro said, in predominantly gay male spaces. It's a confrontation towards a mainstream proposal that our desires are less important in the space. And so through this and all through a nonviolent means of communication, we build awareness teams. And inside of Wavelength, we can expand on how isolation is affecting people, because even before coronavirus, isolation is something that queer and trans people have been facing for a long time. And as we, move through coronavirus and we are looking for ways to restore a sense of belonging and a sense of purpose, we have to ask, what are the practices people are taking in isolation? Do they have pragmatic access to telehealth that can help them mitigate harm if they're a drug user? And also, how are they having access to safer sex? And with house parties, are there accessible ways for people to integrate harm reduction in isolation? And for queer and trans people, we're dealing with loneliness. We're dealing with how to confront. We're already confronting desire before coronavirus. How are we doing that now? And what conversations are being had? And there is a specific trans and non-binary health issues, specifically. Trans women are at an increased threat to their violence on the streets, as well as trans men, specifically chest binding for trans masculine people. The complexities of isolation create a kind of a shame around talking about these things, and we should be using the community space that we have online to have more complex discussions, I think, about how to help one another to solve those issues. And with Wavelength, we can extend that, and we can build kind of a deeper connection through private channels of support that is peer-to-peer and that deals with accepting alternate kind of realities right now. And yeah, I have an ongoing body of work that's around desire, and so I very much would like to imagine this being a space where we can begin to talk about trans desire in a way that is not exploitative and other awareness.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess it is important to highlight this, because oftentimes we might get trapped, or even like the public discourse on harm reduction might get trapped on the idea of substance abuse. And I think for us it's been always a more holistic practice than just like looking into substances, because a lot of people are actually struggling with many other incapacitating addictions or patterns of behavior or anxieties that are still relevant to talk about when we're talking about harm reduction. Because also, as Mariana Vieira was saying, addiction is often also associated with certain traumas that people carry. So it is important, like these things go hand in hand. And I guess like for us, I think we've been very privileged, at least in Mina, in suspension, because we've been operating in a country that has a very particular set of laws. So like drugs are decriminalized. I think then Mariana from Kosmicare can also talk a bit more about the legal frame in Portugal. But this always allowed us to tackle these issues in a way that many other parties could never. You know, we always talked openly about substance abuse. I mean, we even like announced like drug testing schemes where people could just drop in their drugs a few days before the party for test, and then they would arrive at the party and they would get the results. And this is something that cannot happen in a lot of parties, where drug consumption is still criminalized. I mean, I was touring in China, and I guess like the idea, I mean, sometimes we don't even realize how surveillance can be so insidious to get to the point of operating at a level of biometrics. And I think now during the pandemics, we've been seeing this, how surveillance is kind of like growing, and people are just accepting certain tools of surveillance just in exchange for safety, just to like kind of fight the virus. But we need to be very cautious when like accepting and engaging, or even like allowing certain laws to pass. I mean, in China, a club can be raided, and everyone is like forced to just to provide a sample of urine to a cop. And if they have consumed weed, if there's any THC in their bloodstream, they can be incriminated, you know. So of course, like, we're talking about such different realities, and in Portugal we never had this problem. People can carry up to 10 doses of a certain drug with them without being criminalized, because and this has to do with a very simple shift of the paradigm, that drug addiction or drug consumption is not seen as an individual problem, but rather as a community health problem. And that's why people are sent like maybe to a rehab center, or to a center where they can be followed, and to kind of like grow their literacy about substances, rather than just ending up in a jail. So of course, I think this is also a way of creating an international network and tool that allows to reclaim and capture this medical and pharmacological knowledge, which is a lot of technical knowledge that most people don't get access to, and to spread it throughout our communities. And this is a way of like empowering people when consuming, or even when experimenting in whichever way they want to, even be it inside of parties or outside of parties. And maybe before we go into a discussion with all of us, I think it'd be nice to talk about like particular situations that we've been experiencing during isolation, because the lockdown has disrupted so much of the commerce, but also the freedom of movement between countries. There's been a big shortage on certain products that were used to produce certain drugs, certain psychoactive substances. And in Portugal, many friends of ours are actually telling us that there's almost no weed to be found. I don't know, Mariana, if you want to hop in, like, because there's definitely certain dangers, like people being forced into very harsh withdrawals. I mean, there are certain drugs that you cannot just stop overnight if there is no supply. And we even had like a person from the City Hall of Lisbon that has been heavily criticized when he was just saying that this is something that we should be looking after. We should be looking after people that have that struggle with addiction and that during lockdown might not have access to these substances. And this person has been mocked in the news for basically wanting to claim the rights of these people. Mariana, if you want to hop in and say what kind of things Kosmicare has been noticing.
Yeah, in Portugal and in the south of Europe, we had a big shortage of cannabis. And we did notice also some shortage in a smaller scale of amphetamine, MDMA, and cocaine, at least. And as Pedro was saying, China is a big supplier of precursors that are substances used to produce these drugs. And with the borders closing and with the manufacture decreasing, this is likely to have an impact downstream, but with some delay. So I believe it will take some time to see the real impact in the availability of these drugs on the downstream markets due to the borders closing some time ago. And yeah, this is actually a really interesting data from another questionnaire made by Crew, a Scottish team. They say that overall they see a 57% increase on drug use by the population, and 60% of people are saying they are taking different drugs than they used to. And I think this can reflect either a lack of the drugs they used to have, or either a different environment and different context for the usage. But this means that people are trying substances that they are not acquainted to, and they are doing it alone most of the times, and they are doing it with, like the hospitals are full and they don't have as many open places they can go to, and this puts them in a very vulnerable position. And when we are talking about the queer community, like the queer community has a higher incidence of mental health issues and consumptions. And always these pandemics and crises are very disproportionate in the way they affect marginalized and vulnerable groups. They were already in this position and now they're even more affected. So people, on top of everything, they lost their spaces and the shared spaces where they could have their community and contact. And without this, they are alone and separated and dealing with their consumptions, anxieties, and traumas on their own. And I think this is a very pertinent issue.
Yeah, thank you, Mariana. I think Rafi wanted to say something.
Just about isolation and harm reduction and like practical ways. I think that it's really important to emphasize that moving through isolation and how to, not stop completely, but find ways to alter or change the manner in which a person consumes is important. But to what you said, Pedro, that there are people who are substance dependent and are, suffering extreme medical emergencies due to having a lack of substance. And I think that's definitely increased all the way through the queer and trans community, for sure.
Yeah, it's true. And I guess one thing that we're also a bit wary of is also this kind of policing of behaviors, the policing of costumes that is that comes with the pandemic is also something that scares us. I mean, oftentimes we've been like pushing a discourse of like openness and acceptance, and all of a sudden we see even people from the community like checking on each other, you know, but in like almost in a form that is oppressive, you know, like, oh, you've been going to parties, you've been doing so and so. And of course we know that we all have a responsibility during this isolation, like to not only to stay inside and to avoid contaminating like other people with the virus, but at the same time we need to understand that for many people this is in their foundation of being, you know, like to get to meet it with other people or to take substances and groups. So it might be very hard for a lot of people to just like go cold turkey and stop overnight. So this is something, a kind of work that we feel like it's relevant to do at least until the party is back on track, because even though isolation might kind of slowly ease, and we start being able to go into restaurants, going to barbershops, parties will not be running for a very long time, I imagine. And until then, I think it is important to do this work that was mostly happening inside of parties. Yeah, maybe Nada, now we go into the questions. I think we have a bunch already. Yeah,
I think it's a really good sign when you have a lot of questions to ask and you find all the people already covered it. So I was really concerned about taking care of the caretakers themselves, which is also something very important to do. But maybe I have a quick question to all of you, and also on the Wavelength or in your other individual collective, before we go to Elena. And the public questions is, I think it's maybe in this time of isolation, there's also this barrier to entry to even seek help or ask for it, because when you're isolated, you fall into this loop of being alone and not going out, or being more disconnected from your own community and safety spaces that you might have already or not managed to build in the physical space. So how do you deal with this in your own projects for the people who feel that they need the help, but they're unable to get it because this loop of isolation? So maybe if you can shortly comment on this, and then we see what Elena has for us.
I mean, I think I could say something, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Of course, like this situation right now also brings up, sometimes we ask ourselves a lot, what was the club and the parties doing? And ultimately they were providing, exactly as you say, this place that is a sort of community center in the way that people come together, they talk about what is going on, they meet, they share. So of course, right now, through Wavelength, what we're trying to do is precisely to create these workshops or lectures, seminars, where we both invite specialists as well as have an artistic cultural program. And this will be done online as an online platform, where then there can also be discussion and people can be actively involved. So this is an important way to provide some sort of a platform or a mode of connection, both through content that is specific and specialized, as well as through artistic content, which is also something we are all missing somehow. And at the same time, the support channel will aim to be as simplified as possible, the entry process, so that it will protect people's privacy. It will also have direct guidelines in terms of what can we support and what not, and where through our email, people can contact us, and we'll fill in a short questionnaire that already guides them through what is the information that we need in order to provide support, but making sure that it is not have to disclose their identity, and that the modes of communication can also protect them and simplify the mode of access towards this support channel. So that's important things, that we can be met on an online platform and seen and exchange, talk, give content, and watch a movie or have a concert, and also talk about substances. And this would already, this is the idea, also provide an entry point into this support channel, where it's not just a faceless institution or like unknown behind the screen, but that there's already some sense of community that is created, and then that access to the support channel is easy and simplified.
Rafi, you had something to say?
Yeah, so on the topic of isolation and what are the barriers for people to seek out help, it's there has to be an alternative to a medical industrial complex, and we know that people have experiences and there's inequities there, and it's a replication of shame, because usually it's about fixing something. And I think one of the biggest things I think to hold, at least in my knowledge and work around peer counseling and awareness building, is that you have to support the person just where they are without expecting any sort of outcomes. And that is the best way to be able to hold the contradictions that people who are using substances or dependent on them imagine if they're in a crisis or if they're suffering, imagine who they might be outside of it. And so it's about creating a space I think all of our shared work is about community building, in the sense that we have a shared social responsibility to help people to realize their sense of purpose through shared interventions. And it's super important that we provide accurate information and share skills and knowledge, but also to lean into pleasure and joy. And I feel like that's also what the party space gives you. It gives you a reminder that you're part of something that is joyful and positive and happening, and you're part of it. And so I think that the barriers to people getting help are, there's a long list of them. But part of it is that sometimes people, need to be able to feel like you're on a path with them, being witnessed, and that when you're attending to somebody's grief or struggle, it's not just trying to take care of them; it's actually being with them and witnessing what they're going through, and seeing them. And when that happens, that's where transformational change can occur, and that's a part of the community. I think that's something that I think our collaboration somehow feeds.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Elena,
maybe we can go into the questions.
Yeah, I'm not. Is Elena here? Hi, do you hear us?
Yeah, hello everyone. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yes.
Yeah,
hear you
it's a very hard task. It's a very hard task because now last minute some questions are coming and I really don't know which ones to choose. But yeah, I will go with what we have now, and maybe I will add one on top. But really, I would like to ask you, due to the time, maybe you select each of you like one, overall way to answer. So yeah, it doesn't have to be one by one, or I don't know, you decide. So yeah, one question is, what is the level of collaboration with the clubs? Is there a big awareness from that side about the need, from their side, about the need of harm reduction? There was one question to Pedro. Could you share more on the work you were planning to do around the harm reduction connected to GHB, GBL, or is the work now all stopped because of the corona pandemic? There were 1 and 2 questions. I will join them. Curious who would support this kind of work institutionally. There was also another question asking how can we help queer communities to find more sustainable support. And then another question was wondering, do you connect with other online harm reduction initiatives now that your harm reduction work has moved more online? So thinking of example of Arrowit and the Blue Light Forum that have been active since the 90s. And there was one coming just now that I will, I also find it interesting. Do you have any ideas in terms of safety measure with regards to overcoming isolation and exploring dating in pandemic times? and how can people be intimate together safely. And I guess this is something that will continue to be a topic as the measures will go up and down. So thank you all for the great work you're doing, and looking forward to your answers.
Thank you for all these questions. So maybe the first one, the level of collaboration with the clubs. I mean, in Portugal, I guess like this, we need to understand that we work on very different contexts. But in Portugal, we don't have a lot of experience of collaboration with clubs, because mostly our events were operating in illegal spaces. We were not collaborating directly with clubs. Of course, a lot of people that are part of these clubs would be very supportive of our project and would understand the importance of the work we were doing on this level. But oftentimes these institutions felt like that they had also an image to preserve, or also being like state funded or big institutions, they didn't want to engage. And this, I guess, is also why so many of these queer feminist parties operated in a almost diametrically opposed level than these big institutionalized clubs, is because we always be very politically outspoken and to really talk about issues that most clubs do not want to engage publicly with. I remember when there was a big surge of crisis of overdoses with GHB in Lisbon, some clubs started releasing some information, but of course, like, the tactics or the tools were very different than the ones that we were offering. If we, in one hand, we were like sharing knowledge on how to do it in the most safe possible way, increasing the number of people of the awareness team, look specifically for cases of people that might be struggling or might be nearing an overdose, basically like empowering people with knowledge, like about this substance that so many people were taking, but often there was a lot of obscurantism and urban myths around GHB, like such as to treat like a case of GHB lethargy, you should like feed people with speed, like, so just like giving a drug on top of another drug. And these were kind of things that together with Kosmicare, we were kind of dismantling. And clubs, more institutional clubs, a lot of these people were like very supportive of our work, but the way that they were operating was very different, at least in Portugal. But like other projects, institutional projects have been very supportive, and I feel like there is a change in the discourse, in the institutional discourse. Just the fact that we had like a person from the City Hall of Lisbon talking about the relevance of these programs, just the fact that Kosmicare is actually state funded. But I guess this also has to do with the legal frame of Portugal. I don't know if Rafi, if you want to talk a bit about the situation here in Berlin, because actually many of these parties operate in clubs, in legal clubs.
Maybe if we... Sorry. We spoke on. I'm just going to say a note and then you go ahead. Maybe if we can combine like one or more of the questions that Elena already asked together, if they can come together, just for the sake of being able to cover everything. Now, Rafi, go ahead. Sorry to interrupt you.
Before Rafi, what we're doing is that we're just assigning questions to each other, and then we'll just try to go through all of them fast. Yeah.
Exactly. Perfect. Go, Rafi.
Thank you. The collaboration with clubs is a very, very difficult one. With the structures of the security and the bouncers and so on, is there are many people who are actually a part of our community who actually work in these roles, who are accomplices and who are really good at modeling the values that we share in our group that is collaborating here. And so that is really helpful, but there is still a large replication of state violence happening through people when they go to clubs. And so it's really difficult when you are pushing a peer-led, queer trans awareness team, and you're met with this, level of violence that is telling you that you're learning through experience with no experience does not give you the ability to be able to be inside this space and do this. And so our awareness teams have actually dealt with not just taking care of people while at the event, but they've been subject to violence while they're working in these roles, specifically because they've decided to empower themselves and their community. And so that has been a very hard but not impossible thing to work on. There have been moments of good collaboration that were fleeting, and there's not a without taking away the times that we have had success, it is still very difficult to collaborate with structures from the mainstream institution that are not invested in putting people before profits, and understanding that when you organize people in a space, you also organize all of their trauma and their experience into that room, and there is not a one-size-fits-all. And in terms of GHB and GBL use, there's there is not a nonviolent yet that I've seen put into practice, a nonviolent approach that helps deal with the many structures of drugs that are specifically related also to chemsex, and so amphetamines and G. And so there is not an, I look forward to to a moment when there will be, but club, it's still the importance of a peer-led queer and trans awareness team is not yet been given support, but I think it's coming. I think it's needed.
Thank you, Rafi. So the other question about the work that we were doing with suspension and Kosmicare related with GHB and GBL. Yeah, unfortunately, this work has stopped. I mean, it was something that was just starting just before the isolation kicked in. So the idea was to kind of establish a regular meeting for anyone that would like to participate, kind of an alternative structure to Narcotics Anonymous, that we also realized that so many queer trans people would not feel comfortable going to a regular Narcotics Anonymous meeting, because often what they will find is also very different people consuming very different substances on very different contexts. So imagine what it is for a person from our scene going into a Narcotics Anonymous and arriving and saying, yeah, I actually go to gay orgies and we all take G and meth. It's like you might face like it's a huge it's kind of it's a bit difficult like to connect then with the usual people that you find in Narcotics Anonymous groups. I worked in some, and of course like you find mostly straight older men, like a lot of cases with heroin and even cocaine, but you don't find a lot of queer people talking about this very specific substance abuse in the context that we get to know. So the idea was to create an alternative to these groups, mostly focused on our community, that would operate regularly. Yeah, we were working with Kosmicare and also with a doctor from Kosmicare that is used to do this follow-up. And now the idea is to kind of like do this work with the Wavelength and more specifically with the support line. Yeah, and I guess the other question is, yeah, for Mariana Vieira.
Is
But
it
yeah,
question?
yeah. So the
The
question, curious who would support this kind of work institutionally. Mariana Vieira will be talking a bit about the funding that we've been applying for.
You're muted. Can you unmute, Mariana?
I got it now. So as I was saying, our aim is also to frame Wavelength as an artistic project as well, because like something that is very common also in queer party, the queer party scene is precisely this intersection of looking at like club party making as an intersection with art making, and also looking at intersections between art making and healing, and not isolating these fields, but providing a lens that can actually bring them together. So what we have been doing for Wavelength is precisely to go towards artistic fundings, namely European Cultural Foundation, and we're also looking into the City Town Hall of Lisbon is providing support for artistic projects that are coming up through this current situation of pandemic. So this is what we've been looking at. And yeah, so far there are a couple of opportunities that have showed up, and we're doing our best to really frame it as an intersectional framework that will also bring in, especially in the artistic content of Wavelength, also thinking of dance, somatic practices, and people that are also specialists in actually giving tools and frames for us to handle our bodies, our emotions, and the context of party and drug taking. And this is also something that will have an effect afterwards. So we're looking at this came up right now with the current situation as a need and something that is very sought after. Also, it's interesting to see that there are a lot of fundings that are being given out and created precisely because of this situation, and that their main focus is the connection of care, of like art making and care, and thinking about how how we can move forward and continue being making art in this context, and also thinking of isolation. So we're trying to look at those and trust that institutions are also able to regard this as such an intersection. Yeah.
Thank you. And I guess like just to add on this, I guess it's also many of us are lucky or unfortunate that we have some experience in applying for funding, which might not be the case for many people struggling under isolation. So as freelancers, artists, freelancers, we're used to apply for funding. So we want to channel or to apply for funding and then channel this funding into the community. And we're looking into all the possibilities at the moment. I would say that the next question would be for Mariana Cunha from Kosmicare. So do you connect with other online harm reduction initiatives?
Actually, Kosmicare is part of an European network of harm reduction teams. And yeah, we're quite lucky because this system already exists, and this has made it easier to connect with all of these. Yeah, and also there is an app called Trip App that has information on harm reduction services in your area that was built with all these services, and I think that's very useful for people to know and to use.
So yeah, together with Kosmicare, we're going to be building like a list of resources that everyone from Wavelength, but also anyone that would ask, could just reach out and just get to know all sorts of resources and networks that we are in touch with. And yeah, I guess working with Kosmicare is great because the people of Kosmicare already participate in meetings all the time with other harm reduction structures, and they have access to all these infrastructures. So the next question maybe could be because it's referring to something happening here in Berlin. Were there many cases of overdoses in isolation in Berlin? I guess that's the question.
For me?
Yes.
There have been. Sorry, I didn't realize the delay. There has been. There definitely has been, and it is very unfortunate. And I think the thing that the reason why this project is so important is because it will grief from losing someone is something you can't fix, and just like trying to fix someone's either substance abuse problem or solve their internal struggle, it's important that we build just time together so that we can have a little bit of an extension to figure out how do we plug into this bigger network? How do I find my sense of belonging? And that, I think, is important to acknowledge that people have passed, but it's also important for us to find a way to move through it. And I think that there should be a shared community initiative around accountability, that when one person dies because of overdose, that's too much.
Yeah, it's thank you, Rafi. Yeah, it's really saddening every time we get to hear this, especially in isolation. I mean, if isolation already creates a sense of despair in so many of us, then to hear of these stories and to not have even like the possibility like to manifest or to seek comfort and togetherness with our communities when this happens, it's really devastating. And this is something that I feel like, as Rafi was saying, like parties also serve as a structure for grieving. And I mean, I remember like this really powerful moment at Lecken after one person that was very close to our communities actually was part of our community. We would see at our parties, and yeah, it was after their loss. There was a moment in the party just devoted to grieve this person, with people reading poems, sharing stories, and I think that's also part of the work that parties were doing, and now many of us don't have access to. So the other question is, do you have any ideas in terms of safety measures with regards to overcoming isolation and exploring dating in pandemic's time? How can people be intimate together safely? I think Mariana from Kosmicare can expand a little bit on this, because Kosmicare will be overviewing the technical part of the guidelines. But yeah, I mean, all we can say for now is that we creating guidelines, and of course we will address intimacy during pandemic times, and hopefully we will have a workshop about it. Yeah, Mariana.
Yeah, I think you said it. What I wanted to say, basically. Yeah. One thing that has been being told by people is that people who are still dating during quarantine are very concerned about using condoms and all of this because of the previous trauma of other pandemics. But with COVID-19, actually, it's not proven that this is a way of transmission. So it's a respiratory virus, and this is one of the main ways of transmission. And I think maybe it's necessary to address this in a more particular way and to have this information specified.
Yeah, and I guess like then we will seek to connect also with projects that we already know. I mean, one of the very last projects we collaborated here was specifically focused on chemsex, and it's interesting because this was something that we were just doing just before isolation, and in the meantime, there's been already some structures surfacing during the pandemic, specifically focusing on chemsex in the times of COVID-19. And we are definitely seeking into maybe connecting with them and to provide a help, because there's, I mean, also understanding that we are also accessing the knowledge in a time that it's really difficult to know how much we know about the virus. So of course, like, we will be very cautious in the type of knowledge that we will provide, but we will try to be always as informed as possible, linking to technical channels or channels of important or credible sources of information. So maybe the last question could be for all of us to wrap up, and it's do you have any idea? No, sorry. Do you need more counselors than more drugs? How can we help queer communities find more sustainable support? Don't you need more counselors than more drugs? I guess that's the question. I don't know if anyone wants to step in.
I mean, I was already going to step in before, also connected to the topic in the terms of intimacy. That I mean, somehow this is also a moment that has brought up this question a lot, both intimacy, what is intimacy in queer structures where usual traditional family heteronormative models do not apply, and therefore a lot of kinships are had with other people that now cannot gather. Or that may fear being out on the streets together if they're not in the same household, or depending on the countries. I think Berlin is a very specific situation where there's a bit of more relaxed. But there are a lot of places out there where people are, afraid of gathering in case they're not family tied. And this is also a moment where the topic of like self-intimacy comes up. That is also, of course, something we want to explore also through the tool or practice of emotional CPR in a certain way, which can also be something that helps or guides one when consuming substances. So that's somehow a mode of support that can be done peer to peer, but also with oneself. I think I wanted to add this in the sense that it's not so much about counselors and like counseling or telling people what to do, but providing a structure where listening can be done together, and also that people can reach a certain place where they can start to become more intimate with themselves. We usually say, for instance, if someone is in a crisis, it will be very hard for them to sit down and meditate. But like if they have a practice of first being with someone else and being able to subsume and face these anxieties, then this can actually be a structure for support also, for peer and for oneself, with oneself.
And I guess like still on this question, I think I don't know if I note or denote a bit of a provocation, but I mean, I don't think any of us are advocating for more drugs. I think harm reduction is never really about advocating for more drugs. It's about like advocating for, I mean, we know that prohibition has a very long history of failure. Let's look into the dry laws. People didn't stop drinking. They started producing their own poisonous alcohol indoors. And the same happens with drugs, like if we just start forbidding people from taking drugs, like we see in a lot of clubs where people are just expelled when they're like really, or people have to hide what they're consuming. This doesn't allow transparency between peers. It is important if people are taking drugs that there is the possibility for the community to look after each other, that everyone knows what everyone is doing, what everyone is going through, what has everyone taken. And overall is about like literacy. It's about literacy over these substances. It's also about increasing the knowledge about these states of change about these states that people set themselves into in parties and with substances. It's not about promoting them. It's about acknowledging that people will always consume and providing as much knowledge as possible so people can have safer consumptions. Yeah. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything to wrap up.
Yeah, I really I really like that how this is wrapping up this idea of this talking about intimacy. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I had this quote that was like an inspiration. It's like groups committed to growth are the most notable. It is in groups committed to their growth that the most notice of that growth occurs. And it's just this like re-emphasis on community building. And Mariana, what you were saying, it's just absolutely like what we need is to be able to hold space for a time, consistently listen to what people are saying, but also listening to them and trying to hear what they're, what are they trying to say to us, not just with their words, but in nonverbal ways, and how to be alone with oneself and the contents of our own mind, and to share the knowledge that we have. And TS Raver, I have a ton of toolkits that I can provide, that I try to give out as much as possible and share online. But it's about sharing. It's about an exchange of learning how to build intimacy, and that is how this initiative, and this is how we break isolation. That is the apparatus, actually, to breaking oppression across all the colonialisms that we're facing. But I think that us being in this space and staying connected and making yourself available, especially if you're in isolation and you need someone, it's really important to check in. Maybe someone can't reach out, but constantly checking in and reminding people that you're available. And TS Raver is always available for that. And we are on Instagram and Facebook, and we are committed to having this project. And I think also the institutional question that came up, I think that it's absolutely a fact that music changes your neurobiology and your ability to regulate stress. And I think that we all have a different set of experience and practice that we can amplify through this Wavelength project, and to share the skills that we have that are outside of criminalizing ways of joining in space together and healing.
Yeah, thank you. Just to remind everyone that the very first event will be on the 21st of May, so in 2 weeks, and the idea is to do it every 2 weeks on Thursdays. We will not have a Facebook page, but we will have a very simple web page, and all the collectives that are part of the project will be sharing news and information about the project. And if you want to reach out to us, the email is wavelength.19@gmail.com. Yeah. Thank you.
I can copy the email to the chat now, so if anyone wants to see it, if that's okay. Okay, thank you very much. That has been, the time has passed very fast, but it was super interesting. And I was happy to see familiar faces and new faces in this conversation. And I have personally enjoyed it very much. And I took a quick look at the chat. It was very active. I think Elena already summarized 7 questions, but I believe there was more. So apologies if we didn't manage to reply to everything. So now I'm going to pass the screen to Tatiana to share with us the next Disruptive Friday for the 7th week in a row. We're enjoying this series very much, but it also reminds us for how long we have been in lockdown. So yeah, thank you all very much. It has been a pleasure, and also a soothing conversation to have, despite all the difficult situation and the difficult work that you're doing and what's happening in general. So thank you very much. And then I think we'll go to Tatiana. And
thank you.
Yeah, have a good weekend.
You too.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everybody. I also really enjoyed the conversation. And also I wanted to answer to you in a sense, so I take 1 minute more because I think that need any support also from the Disruption Network Club to do a workshop also related to the discourse of online dating. I think we can also offer ourselves, perhaps this could be our future community meetup in the weeks to come. I don't know. I think that perhaps we can discuss, because also in the past we have been discussing a lot about the surveillance and control on online dating. I think if you want any support from us from this topic, I think that would be really interesting to collaborate together. So perhaps we can speak. But now I want to introduce what will happen next week. And we will also speak about people that were in isolation before the pandemic and are often in isolation. These are the whistleblowers. And we will dedicate the Friday to whistleblowing during COVID-19. So this is also very important topics nowadays, because whistleblowers are the people that are also exposing misconducts and injustice, and often they are also subjects of persecution. So we want to address the topic of whistleblowing. We will do together with Renata Avila, with Joseph Farrell. Joseph Farrell is the WikiLeaks ambassador. Renata Avila instead is an international human rights lawyer. Then we will have Annegret Falter from the Whistleblower Network of Germany. And Rimas Geyer, that is working at the Hermes Center. So all together we will discuss from one side how it's possible to protect whistleblowers during the pandemic, because also we need the people exposing truths of misconducts during this time. But at the same time also we will discuss how it's possible to be collectively aware of what needs to be exposed. So in a sense, the discourse of whistleblowing becomes a collective responsibility, not only related to the vulnerable, but also to all the people that want to expose misconducts of powers at the moment. So I thank you, all of you, and I pass to Pedro and Nada to say the final goodbye. And otherwise, we will meet on Friday, May the 15th at 5 p.m. again. Thank you.
Thanks, Tatiana.
Thank you, Tatiana.
You.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really great to have this kind of like first exposure of the project we've been cooking in the past weeks. It's been hard because I think we've set ourselves to, not only to be able to provide care to everyone, but at the same time, we also have been needing a lot of care. Many of us have been also struggling with isolation. But yeah, I think it's really great that we're connecting here, and that, we're looking forward to hear also suggestions and proposals from other people to join in the project. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. So see you next Friday. Ciao, ciao.
Yes.
Thank you. Bye. We're offline, right?
Oh, wow, so cute.
Are we offline?
Okay, we're